our second equity event supporting LGBTQ plus students and their families. My name is Farah Sabah. I'm the County Superintendent of Schools, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. You know, when I think about equity, it is something that is so important to us here at the County Office of Education and to so many of you that have joined us tonight. It's at the heart of the strategic plan for our COE. And to us, it's more than just a word. It's about our actions. It's the steps that we take every day to ensure that our schools are more equitable and safe and inclusive for all students. We watch what's happening in other states and other countries. In Santa Cruz County, we value our diverse community with people of different cultures, races, perspectives, gender identities, sexual orientations. We condemn acts of violence such as those that occurred in Boulder and Atlanta. We stand with all our communities in our county. And right now, especially with our Asian American community, because of the ongoing harassment and violence against the Asian American community. And with our transgender community, in light of the various acts of violence against them, as well as other states introducing anti-LGBTQ legislation. We stand for safety as we value it here in Santa Cruz County and in the state of California. All of us stand with one another to eliminate racism and homophobia and transphobia in our community and to speak out against it wherever we find it. One piece of hopeful news is the fact that Dr. Rachel Levine became the first openly transgender person confirmed by the Senate as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health. We know there's always more to learn, and the way we learn is to listen to one another. Listening leads to understanding, and understanding leads to relationship building, and relationship building leads to more equitable and inclusive communities. I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us today. Me gustaría darles la bienvenida y agradecerles su presencia esta noche y hacerles de acuerdo también que tienen la opción de escuchar esta presentación en español. Si miran el icono que está en la parte inferior de la página, pueden seleccionar interpretación y cambiarlo a Spanish, a español, para escuchar toda la presentación en español. I'd like to thank everybody who's come together to put this event together. To celebrate and to listen to our members of our LGBTQ plus community. We thank the various organizations and individuals who helped us in our event tonight, and to everyone involved, and especially you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for making tonight so special, for allowing us to learn from each other, to hear each other, and to talk about things that we can do to support each other. In attendance tonight are people of all ages, including students from our schools. You're welcome to utilize the chat to interact with one another, to interact with our speakers, and to ask questions. We expect everyone to be appropriate, as if this were a school in a classroom. And in the chat room, we thank you for keeping your cameras off and muting your microphones. Our purpose here in Santa Cruz County is to be a model of inclusivity, support, and success for all students, and to hear stories from our LGBTQ plus community, to seek your feedback for ways to reach these goals. That's our purpose for tonight. Now, one of the things that inspires us and drives us to act in support of our LGBTQ community is the fact that we know anecdotally and through a lot of data and research that we've seen how the challenges that our LGBTQ youth is facing in our community. One of the sources of information that we've utilized significantly is the California Healthy Kids Survey. And this is administered every other year. And it tells us a little bit about what our students are experiencing from their perspective. It's an anonymous survey, and every question is linked to earlier parts of the survey where students identify their gender, their sexual orientation, and other demographic information. And some of the things that we've learned, for example, when we look at students who identify as LGBTQ and how they compare to students who do not identify as LGBTQ, we see that when we look at the two different groups, some very, very daunting and sobering information comes to light. When we look at our 7th, 9th, and 11th graders, when asked a question on the California Healthy Kids Survey, have you seriously considered suicide in the last 12 months? We see that large numbers, 46% of our LGBTQ students answered in the affirmative to that question, compared to their non-LGBTQ peers. Now, these numbers should be at 0, but the stark difference between these two groups tells us that their experiences are so different, and their ability to be successful and to have wellness and be comfortable in their own skin is very different. When we look at California, we see a similar discrepancy, with up to 50% of students who identify as LGBTQ stating that they've considered suicide in the last 12 months. When we look at we asked the question, have you been harassed or bullied because you were gay or lesbian or somebody thought you were? We see that for LGBTQ students, 41% have stated that they have experienced this in the last 12 months. Of course, the numbers are also starkly higher than students who don't identify as LGBTQ. In California, we see the same trend. When we look at the same data and we look at how our students, our LGBTQ students, discuss if they felt threatened, if they've been pushed or shoved, if they've been in a physical fight, you'll see that this trend of our LGBTQ students experiencing higher levels of insults and threats and bullying and physical altercations than their non-LGBT peers. This is just one piece of information that drives us to take action. It's just one reminder that many of the anecdotal stories that our students bring to us are ones that are permeating our schools, permeating our community, and that demand that we take action. I'd like to assert to you that we at the County Office of Education have made a strong commitment that we can change these statistics, and we are so excited about you being here to help us change these statistics, because we can make our schools better, we can make our community better, and we have an obligation to do everything in our power to support our students, to transform the environment that they exist in to ones that are welcoming and safe. And that's what this is all about. It's my pleasure now to introduce our speakers for our evening tonight. Two powerful voices in our community, leaders in Monterey Bay, who can speak about the intersection of their identities, being Black and queer in the Monterey Bay. I'd like to introduce Ashlyn Adams, who moved here to Santa Cruz from Oakland to attend UC Santa Cruz and continues to work in our community, currently as the interim co-director of the Santa Cruz Diversity Center. And Tyler Williams, who grew up in a military family and lived in many places in the United States before he moved to Monterey area to attend CSU Monterey Bay. He works at the Naval Postgraduate School. He's the founder of Monterey Pride and serves on the Monterey City Council. Please join me in welcoming Ashlyn and Tyler. Welcome.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Hello, Tyler.
Hello, Ashlyn. Hello. Good evening, everybody.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start us off with a little bit about myself, and then I'll grill you, Tyler.
It'll be a mutual experience. I look forward to that one.
Love this. Love this. Hey, everybody. I'm Ashlyn. I use she, her pronouns. I am coming at you live from the Diversity Center, where I'm currently interim co-director. I'm in my brand new office. It will not be this empty forever, but for now, work with me on this background. I grew up mostly in the Bay Area, especially Oakland. I spent quite a bit of time on the Alameda Naval Base, where my stepdad was stationed, as well as on my biological father's reservation further north. I come from a big family. I'm the oldest of 10. Don't recommend it. Don't have 10 kids. That's a lot. There is a little bit of an age gap between me and my siblings, as my parents married other people and settled down. I went to public school for most of my education until high school. And then I got a scholarship to a private Catholic school. You can guess, they love me. I co-founded their first GSA, except we weren't allowed to use the word gay in the names of any of our clubs. So we called it the Open Council on Sexual Identity, because if we weren't going to get to say gay, we were going to make the Franciscan brothers say sex. So felt pretty good about that. I was out and proud with all of my friends, everybody at school, even teachers, everybody was aware of this. I didn't discuss anything with my family though. I eventually came out to all of them as well, once kind of by force involving a very popular newspaper, and once by accident where I accidentally let it slip. So that was awkward. I ended up moving down to Santa Cruz to go to UCSC. At the same time, I got custody of two of my younger siblings, so I moved them down here with me as well. And one of them is also queer. I've been here ever since. It does not hurt that right after I finished college, I met the person I would eventually marry, who may be on this call. It's possible. She might be lurking somewhere. I feel like I've worked so many of the jobs available around here. I'm kind of like Kirk from Gilmore Girls. I just work everywhere. But for the last couple of years, I've been focusing on my film work, which is a whole different deal, and on running the youth program at the Diversity Center, which has been an incredible experience. I feel like I've learned so much from everybody in that group. But really just all of a sudden focusing on my queerness has been a really interesting experience, and not something that I've done before, because people can't tell when they just look at me necessarily. Some people have really good gaydar. But not everyone can just sort of clock me as being queer, whereas they can clock me for race. So you know, it's been a really interesting experience, and I'm really excited to be doing this today. And I'm pretty sure that Tyler and I are around the same age and have almost tiny bits of similar backgrounds, but we've never met before. So just when you think that there are only two Black people within a Tri-County area, it turns out there's actually way more than that. And so Tyler, I'm super excited to get to meet you virtually, I guess, and get to know you a little bit. So what have you been up to? How did you end up here?
Hi, Ashlyn. Yes, thank you. And thanks for your introduction there. It's nice. So for everybody else's awareness, we had a little prep call as we were getting ready for this, and I was able to get to know Ashlyn a little bit better. And so I'm definitely going to pry into your story a little bit more so that we can share that with folks. But let me share a little bit about myself first, and then you and I can exchange conversation. So yes, very similar stories in a lot of spaces. I actually was a Navy brat. My mom was in the Navy. I was born in a naval hospital. And I just want to back up even further in time before I was born, when my parents met. So my mom is from upstate New York, and my father is from Mississippi. He was born in 47 in what you can imagine to be a very interesting place for a person of color, particularly a Black person, to live at that time. And so given that, I grew up with an experience of the Black side of my family. I'm of mixed race. The Black side of my family being very religious, Church of God in Christ. And they make sure it's very clear that it's a Church of God in Christ. It's not Protestant, it's not Baptist, it's Church of God in Christ. And so anyways, my dad's side of the family migrated up to Albany, New York when he was 12 years old. And that's how my parents met. They were relatively close to each other in upstate New York. So again, I was born into a military family, never lived anywhere for more than 4 years my entire life. And so I've had the pleasure of just living all over the world. And after high school, I applied to go to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. I got accepted there, and your first year you're called a plebe. So went to plebe summer, did the military training before we started the academic year. And the thing about the Naval Academy is that your time there is 50% academic and 50% military. And actually an important point about this story too, is this is during my time there was during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so uh, of course, not of course, but I did. I got treated different while I was there. And I'll share two main experiences. The first I'll say is they just kind of continued to try to find ways of disciplining me. And that was their way of kind of getting at my identity. Even though I wasn't out, right? Don't ask, don't tell. But I wasn't even out to myself. So they could see probably mannerisms and noticed kind of behaviors, and made these assumptions and treated me different likewise. So this first thing was they had me doing marching tours in the middle of the night. So I had my cap on, my cover is what they call it in the military, and a rifle in my full uniform, and I'm marching in squares. They call them marching tours. And so I was doing these in the middle of the night while all my colleagues were sleeping. I could hear them snoring in their rooms. They had me do that a couple of times. And it was for no reason other than my identity. And I'm sure Blackness had something to do with it too, because there's not a lot of Black people at the school either. And then I'll just kind of lead to actually how I ended up leaving. I finished the entire school year, but when I got to the last semester, I ended up failing 2 classes. And so I had to go to an academic board. And usually they work with you to try to find a way to keep you to stay. They make you take some classes over the summer. But I went to the academic board, and my leadership had nothing nice to say about me. And actually one of my colleagues, and a senior, he was my platoon commander, he even said, all Midshipman Williamson wants to do is dance and sing, which was true. But, that's nothing wrong with that. And the fact that you use that to call me out on something instead of trying to say what you thought that you really wanted to say. So anyways, because of the lack of support from my leadership, I ended up getting kicked out of what I saw was probably the best school in the world. For me to come from a military family and being able to go to college and get recruited into the military was a great honor. So it was devastating for me to leave, but I can't be more thankful because it created a path for me that I've been able to take, which I'll kind of go to my next part of the story, which is politics. So I ended up going to community college, and it's 2008. I have this professor, she's teaching critical thinking, and we're talking about civil disobedience and such. And I have known this stuff from, grade school, but just the way that she taught it and the way that I was able to interact on the subject with my classmates was just truly amazing. And at the same time, there's this man that looks very much like me running for the president of the United States. And the thing is that I never really paid much attention to national politics. It just wasn't my thing. I was actually going to school to be a doctor at the time. But I was inspired by this guy. And so I signed up to be a volunteer on his campaign, and I did a couple of phone banks, but I wasn't able to get as involved as I wanted to in 2008 because I was working 2 jobs. I was going to school full time. So I made a commitment to myself to get more involved in the 2012 campaign. So that's what I did. 2012 came around. I signed up to be a volunteer, a fellowship program. I did that for 3 weeks, and 3 weeks into that, they offered me a position on the campaign. I ended up being responsible for the campaign out of the San Francisco headquarters, and so that was a great honor. Now, again, this entire time, I'm still kind of closeted. I'm still trying to hold this all in, and I was kind of, I was figuring it out for myself, but it was still a struggle. But being in San Francisco, it's pretty hard. And so, I mean, they put the headquarters smack dab in the middle of the Castro, and there's these ceiling to floor windows with beautiful men walking by all day. So anyways, I had a volunteer that helped me kind of figure things out and accept myself for who I am, and kind of talk to me about how I can do it with my loved ones. And then another one took me out one night. I ended up meeting my first male partner while I was there. It was a wonderful thing. So I appreciate the Obama campaign and everything that came from that experience because of my opportunity to be able to come out. Segueing from that, one of the things that is the basis of the Obama campaign is community organizing. So I took the community organizing skills that I learned on the Obama campaign and brought them back down to Monterey and helped co-found Monterey Peninsula Pride. So that happened in 2017, and we've been hosting Pride every year since. So the first 2 years we did it in Seaside. In 2019 we did it in Monterey. Last year we did a virtual one because of the pandemic. We're talking about maybe doing another virtual one this year, but just super excited to be able to create this kind of experience for my community. Jumping back to the politics thing real quick, and then I'll shut up so that Ashley and I can conversate a little bit more here. But you know, being elected to the Monterey City Council, this kind of all led up to that. And so what's particularly interesting about me being elected in the city of Monterey, for those of you that are maybe familiar with the area, Monterey is 85% white. It's a little bit more on the upper class side. And so for somebody that looks like me, it was I think quite a feat and something to celebrate for a lot of people in the community. So I was the first Black person to be elected to the Monterey City Council. I was the first openly LGBTQ person to be elected to the council, and I was the youngest person to be elected to the council. So a lot of firsts, and it is truly an honor to work with amazing people in the community. And I see Adam Spickler on the call, and he is definitely one of the folks that I've had the honor to work with, and continue to look forward to those opportunities moving forward. But I'm excited. Sometimes it's a challenge, but seeing the work that people are wanting to do in the community gives me the inspiration to keep going every single day. I'll share one last story about me being on the council, and it kind of connects this all as far as identities. So in the city of Monterey, we had these things called what called neighborhood associations. And so these neighborhood associations kind of have a lot of political power in the community. But these neighborhood associations are usually made up of people that are homeowners. Fun fact, 65% of the people that live in Monterey are renters. So when we talk about representation, the neighborhood associations are probably not the area that we want to go to make sure that we're being communicative and outreach into the community, but the city really depends on the neighborhood associations. So anyways, they have these meetings called the presidents of each of the neighborhood associations. They get together every once in a while. They meet with city staff and some of the other elected officials. So they're having this meeting, and one of them decides to say, if Tyler would just stop talking so much, we can get a lot more done on the council. And it's like, it's what's interesting is that I am the only council member who publicly comes publicly out and pushes forward policy on the council. I mean, you can go publicly to our website and you can look at our agendas, and you can see that Councilmember Williamson suggests or is recommending for approval, but you don't see that from my colleagues. And so I'm pushing to get things done because that's why I was elected. We were elected to move policy forward and create policy for our communities. And so for somebody to say that, it to me was a little bit of a dig at my identity. And I know him personally. There's a little bit more to it, but I think there's very much something there for this kind of white establishment within the city of Monterey that I'm proud to stand in and start pushing the barriers here a little bit. So I'm going to stop my story. And Ashlyn, you were saying something very interesting that we talked about a little bit in our pre-call that I would just ask you about. You were identifying how your outness kind of slipped on accident. Can you describe, if you feel comfortable, no pressure, but could you describe that story of what happened there?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, my mom moved across the country, and I was an emancipated minor here in California. We still talked on the phone, and at some point, I had been dating this one girl for like a year, maybe. It had been a minute. So yeah, that was my bad. And I'm talking to my mom, and she's like, "So what are you doing today?" And I was like, "Oh, me and my girlfriend going somewhere doing something." And she was like, "You're what?" And I was like, "What? This is my bad. I see." Yeah, so being gay for a while, ooh. And then I must have been on speakerphone because my brother yells, "I'm gay too," and then runs in his room and slams the door.
Your poor mom.
I my mom was livid. She was like, "I did not raise gay kids." And I'm like, well, if you look at the percentage of your kids that are gay, this could be your fault. So she's certainly come to terms with it now. There's no changing it. So it was too late already. But at the time she was pretty shocked. And you know, if I had to go back and do it again, I would probably be a little more reasonable, a little gentler. But then on the other hand, I grew up in an American Baptist church, and my uncle was the pastor. And you know, I went to San Francisco Pride one year, and the whole group of friends, this girl I was dating, we're having a great time. And some dude was like across the street over there taking pictures. And I don't know, he came over and talked to some of the people on the edge of the group at some point, but I was like, who is this? Creepy. I was maybe 17, maybe. And it turns out he had asked what our names were, and my very stupid friends told this man what our names were. And imagine my surprise when a picture of the two of us is the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, like this big. It was so big. And my uncle was like, "So Ashlyn," I was like, uh-oh. He's like, "Look, you can't be Black and gay. You can't be both. You can pick one struggle." And I was like, then I choose to be gay. See how this doesn't make sense?
Doesn't work like that.
So, I think he is still struggling with this this idea of intersectionality. He's like, well, you can only be so many things. I think it's coming from a good place, but you know, he's not adjusting quite as well. How's your family?
Well, and I just wanted to provide some clarity. I know we're running short on time here, so I want to find some space for us to try to wrap this up. But for those that don't have a full understanding of what it means when we say intersectionality, it's really when we have when those of us that have two identities that we come from two identities that are discriminated against, and the intersection of that experience. So because we are queer, the discrimination that we bear from that, while also being Black, it just kind of adds that additional burden. And so it's interesting because, you know, when we succeed at something, right, it's like everybody gets all excited. It's like, whoa, you made it, right? And to a certain extent, it makes sense, right? Because we've had to endure through so much, and it shouldn't have to be that way. We need to find a way of kind of removing some barriers for folks. But anyways, to your question, my family, I mean, I could go into, there's a whole story of when I met my first partner, and I mean, it just kind of, it got crazy. It got really, I mean, I'm going to save it for another story. So y'all just tune in for another thing for that. I did just want to share two other points before we get the boot here. I don't know if somebody's going to make a stop at a certain point, but I'm going to do two things real quick. So one is, I think it's really important, right? I've identified this space of where I come as far as like where I'm discriminated against my identity groups. And when I think when we're identifying these, it's also important to speak about our space of privilege, right? So I kind of just wanted to identify some spaces where I am privileged, and I own that. I'm a homeowner. Again, I was telling you, 65% of the people in my city are renters. So that's such a privilege just in general in the world. I'm an elected official, so I come from a position of power, and I'm very mindful of that as I do my work within the community. I'm a cisgender man. So, I do a lot of work in the community to try to stand as an ally um, with women and folks that don't identify as a man. And one thing in particular that I would point out is one of the most amazing groups that I found in the community is this group called Whites for Racial Equity. And they do great work. So it's mainly white people. And the amazing thing about what they do is they step up and do the work for discrimination against communities of color for them, because it shouldn't have to be people of color that are trying to fight something that they didn't even create in the first place. Amazing. It's absolutely amazing what they do. And they're actively engaged in trying to fight um, racial issues within the community. So I would definitely look them up if you're interested in supporting that manner. And then the last privilege that I would identify, and there could be others, so feel free to throw some at me if you think some, is able-bodied. I'm definitely, my body functions in a way that I don't have to worry and think about things in the way that some folks have to struggle with every single day. And the world is shaped in a way to support those individuals, to support people like me. So anyways, I just wanted to identify my privileges. One last thing, and I'm going to pass it back to you to close this off. So there were some things that I experienced in the workplace that I think are really important to describe, particularly around being LGBTQ+. So my boss, one of my bosses, a few months back, so this is like not that far in the past, I don't even know how we got on the subject, but he had said something like, oh, LGBT plus whatever XYZ. And I was shocked to hear that somebody in the workplace was saying this, and this is a manager. And so, my response wasn't what I probably would do today, but I chose to kind of just stay silent. I didn't really respond to it. And I say this for two reasons. One is, as a person that's coming from a discriminated group, you should never feel like you did the wrong thing by not addressing something like that, right? Like, you're entitled to feel the way that you feel. So don't feel the pressure. Should you? Absolutely. I mean, if you get the chance to like stop somebody from doing something, that could happen to somebody else that is maybe in a more fragile place that you could have helped prevent. But, we're all going through our own thing. So don't put that pressure on yourself. You be you. But now, so that was when I was in a previous position. Now I'm in HR. And so I had another experience, and this is kind of my last story here, where I was speaking to a manager. I was working with him on an action. And again, I don't know, we were having a conversation and he was talking about a story when he was talking to a friend, and he goes, "That's gay." And I just froze. And when he was done talking, I think he could tell. And he decided to jump in and he goes, "Oh, I was just kidding. I have a gay friend," which he's digging himself a hole at this point. And so
No, you don't.
I told
You
him
don't
that's
have a gay friend.
yeah, you're right. Right. So I told him that's inappropriate. And, I tried to push it a little bit with him, but obviously it wasn't going anywhere. I reported it to management and it went all the way up the chain, and he got reported to. So, there is space for us to fight for these things. It does happen in the workplace. And I think, especially if you're an ally, I just ask you, please do the work, because you're not coming from, that's a place of privilege. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for your story. And Ashlyn, we really appreciate it. We are a little bit over our time at this point, and so really appreciate everything you've shared with us. Ashlyn, if you wouldn't mind introducing our next speaker, which is Rachel.
Absolutely. If anybody wants to talk further about intersectionality, please do email me, and we'll get that conversation continued. And if anybody knows about talking about intersectionality and about advocating for herself and for others, it's definitely the incredible Rachel Morales-Warney, who is a personal hero of mine and talking right after us here.
Thank you. You're one of my heroes. So we're even Steven on that. Let's see, I could talk about intersectionality for a while, because I've got the big old intersectionality salad going on in my house. So, hello everybody. My name is Rachel Morales Warney. My pronouns are she, her, and ella because I am Latinx. And I come from Mexican indigenous descent. So my parents were farm workers. They lifted us up. So we were educated, strong kids, and they moved us into, I was public school up until high school, and they sent me to a college prep where I learned that I definitely was the minority. Although I'm white presenting, my dad always told me you will live in the spaces in between because we are fully hardcore Mexican Catholic people, but they educated us, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I lived in very white passing spaces. So having said that, and my parents were of the Jesuit Catholics, they always said public service, public service. So right after high school, I became an AIDS activist and an ally in the community, and I went full bore because that's what a good Catholic community does, and caused a lot of problems in my house. A lot of cousins still don't talk to me, and I was kind of like, I'm doing as I was told. I was doing as I'm raised, so deal with it, because I was also told to be stronger than the women on the shoulders I stood, which they're super strong, so I don't know what that was about. But fast forward, my husband and I have 2 queer kids. I have a pansexual daughter who is gender role non-conforming. And I have a 2-spirited child who's currently in high school who is also neurodiverse. So, you know, they couldn't just have their 2-spirit and their neurodiverse and their Latinx. You know, we just got to keep piling on for intersectionality issues. But having said that, I've been asked to talk about my experience in the school system here. I live up here in San Lorenzo Valley, up in the foothills. And to start off, I actually want to thank all those teachers who respect pronouns, who also respect the kids' privacy, and who set an example in the classroom on what that looks like. And also that are aware of all of their marginalized kids and try to add in and include, be very inclusive in history. And we're on Ohlone land, so you know they're bringing up all the things that need to be learned, and they're not as white presenting. And I appreciate that very much because I know that doesn't always happen, and it's a hard thing to do. But what my kids have experienced, we talked about the bullying and the suicide and the physical altercations. Well, my kids have not tried suicide. It has definitely been on mind, and we have dealt with all 3 in our house for, it feels like an eternity, but probably for the past 6 years. My eldest just started college, and they realized there's a whole other world out there, which is amazing to see because they went to Chicago, and it's a big city, and there's more diversity, which is amazing to experience. And I encourage everybody, go experience some diversity in your lives. But it's been hard on a school front. I feel like we fight all the time. We have groups that help us. We have teachers that help us. But you know, there's still that teacher who doesn't understand the importance of language, because language matters. Pronouns matter. Understanding that element and being open to it makes it a safer classroom. So when you're gaslighting my kid because you don't feel like you need to change your language because it's always been this way, first off, you're not understanding how language evolves. Like if we all spoke the way we're supposed to speak, we'd all sound totally different, and I would be speaking a different language altogether. But when you do that, you show other people in that classroom that that's acceptable and okay, and you've just put my kid in a new level of danger. And by you acting a little more, you being anybody, including myself, you act a little more woke and not willing to listen to other viewpoints. That makes it very dangerous in the classroom as well. As an advocate for my kids, and I am the mom, so if you're any attachment to my kid, you're probably at my house and I'm feeding you at some time at some point in the life. I will make sure you're taken care of because I understand and have seen and have experienced how queer kids have been pushed out. So those things are very real and happen. And I think for all those teachers, I bless you who understand that and give that safety in the classroom. I think that needs to be normalized. I think that needs to be regular in every class. And I have lots of reasons that why should have, and I have lots of great suggestions. And another big worry I have, I know I'm running out of time. A lot of kids, queer kids here during COVID, we've lost a lot of them they've just gone underground, and that's frightening. And we need to make sure they're safe. But now that we go back into classes, there's a whole other segment of these kids who've had the freedom to be out online and in social media. And now they have to go back into the classroom. And that's frightening because hate crimes are real. The things I've heard waiting in the parking lot is unreal altogether. So I think there's a new level of safety we need to have for not just queer kids, all kids as they come back, because even though they've been home, schooling from home, they've kind of let themselves out a little bit, out into the wild. So now everyone's seeing a truer self. So how do we bridge those gaps, and how do we make that safety to happen? The biggest thing I could really suggest for anybody in any situation, classroom or otherwise, is listen to language. Language matters. I'm not perfect, but I certainly try to respect everybody's pronouns. I've introduced in my everyday life, in work life, I too work in HR, Tyler. So I have gender neutral language, which can trip some people up if they're not used to it. But, you know, I introduce myself, and I introduce myself with my pronouns. So that way you understand I'm an ally and I understand. But even I know teachers, my kids have come home with forms and they've been excited. Look, it asked me what my pronouns are. It asked me what my preferred names are. This is amazing, because there are a lot of kids, and a lot of kids of color, who might be out at school, but they're not out at home, because there's a difference between the safety of your classroom and the safety of your home, which also adds to the whole COVID being at home thing that needs to be reintroduced as we go back into those classrooms. So as a parent that has struggled with all this, and I know my email's out there somewhere, feel free to talk to me about it, but I think we can all be advocates to show them that respect, that, you know, respect's given in its two ways. If you can respect the language and you can respect these kids, they'll respect you as well. And it builds a safe classroom, and it builds a safe community. Because my old grew up in the 70s, 80s South, what queer and LGBT looked like then, it's totally different now. It's got a whole new language base. It's got a whole new spectrum. And there's so many more kids who identify within this vast spectrum that didn't exist, which I think is beautiful. And I encourage it, but at the same time, it's hard to keep up with. So maybe as we teach and we help our kids, maybe we can listen to them and maybe learn a few things from them. Would be amazing. Thank you for inviting me. I was very honored that you did. And Ashlyn, I miss you, and I can't wait till I can see you and give you a big bear hug.
Rachel, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight, and for inspiring us. Also, Tyler and Ashlyn, thank you so much for your inspiring, powerful words tonight. We'd like to take a moment to reflect a little bit on what we've heard tonight. And you know, what I heard as I was thinking about this, one is about the complexity of our identities and how that's evolved. When we talk to students now, we ask them about their racial identity or their gender identity, and it's become so much more sophisticated. And I think that our schools are really trying to adapt to this evolving sense of self that students are sharing. And when I listened to Rachel talking about how the steps we need to take to build safer parking lots, safer classrooms, safer office spaces, and one of those steps is through language, is just one thing that we need to do. We have to be doing immediately to be able to create safer spaces for our students. So I'm so grateful to Ashlyn and Tyler and Rachel for sharing your truths and helping us to learn more about your experiences. We're going to transition now to listen to think about, hear a little bit about from our students' perspectives. And we are going to be presenting to you a video from some of our queer students. And they're going to be talking about what it was like for them to come out to their parents. And also they're going to be giving us some advice about to parents for when their children come out to them. The video includes stories from Tashi, from Reyes, and from Brooks, and we are so grateful to them for talking to us and for participating in the creation of this video. I'm going to go ahead and We are so grateful to to Reyes, Tashi, and Brooklyn for sharing their stories with us. And this represents our second Equity Series event, and student voices are always the highlight for us. And we have a student panel that we are going to be speaking with in just a moment. I'd like to introduce Rob Darrow, who is somebody that we get to work with from the Safe Schools Project quite a lot. He actually provides training and support for us at the County Office of Education. He's done workshops on a variety of topics for both our staff, as well as helping us become compliant with the California Healthy Youth Act, and make sure that our curriculum is representative of LGBTQ history, and a variety of efforts to ensure inclusion and diversity and equity in our schools. And so I'm proud to introduce Dr. Rob Darrow, who is going to be leading us through the next part of our event.
Thanks, Ferris. We're waiting for everybody to get spotlighted here, the student panel. Once again, just to introduce myself, I'm Rob Darrow. My pronouns are he, him, his. I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, worked in other places and have moved back. So I'm a result of all of our schools here in Santa Cruz County. So it's great to be a product and interact with our other students here. I'm waiting for one more. I think we're waiting for Justin. There they are. Great. So it's good to see all of your faces. So welcome to everybody. If you've got questions for the students as we go along, feel free to type them in the chat room. If we have time, we'll ask the questions. But I'd like to start with each of you. And we didn't really talk about an order, did we? So I think, so we're going to go in this order. I'm going to start with Q, and then Tashi, and then Rez, and then Justin. To give you each a chance to share who you are, your grade level, your school, and how you identify. So Q, let's start with you.
Hello, I'm Q. I go to Scotts Valley High School. I am a sophomore. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm queer and transgender.
And I think you can all leave yourself unmuted and we can just flow with it. So you can all just join in.
Okay, I'm Tashi. You heard a little bit about me in the other video. I'm a sophomore at Santa Cruz High and I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Reyes. You also heard about me in the other video and also my mom speaking. I go by he, they pronouns. I'm two-spirited and autistic. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Justin. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm a student at Oasis at a Cabrillo College, and I'm a junior in high school.
Great. So it's good to get connected with all of you again. Why don't you, and again, we're just going to go in that order for that opening and then the closing. But at this point, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the things that make you feel safe at school.
So I think one of the biggest things that makes me feel safe at school is our SAGA club at Scotts Valley High School. And for us, we used the acronym SAGA for Sexuality and Gender Acceptance. And in middle school, I didn't have a SAGA club and I really wanted there to be one, but I just didn't have time to start it. And so the middle school has one now actually, but it's been really good for me to have a SAGA club at high school, and that's something that makes me feel safe.
I think that something that helps me feel safe in school is that I've had a lot of very good experiences with teachers being respectful of pronouns and kind of making space for people to talk, not necessarily have a discussion about their pronouns, but just to bring up pronouns and invite people to share them if they're comfortable. And that definitely makes me feel validated and safe when they're used correctly.
I forgot to mention what school I go to. I'm a junior at San Lorenzo Valley High School. I actually really don't feel safe at school, and the only things that do make me safe is actually my friend group. We have a GSA at our school, which I was the president last year, and now my friend Joaquin is, and we really use that space to, allow other queer kids to come and hang out with us and come and hang out. we use the term GSA as Gender and Sexuality Alliance. So it really depends on what school you go to. But yeah, I really don't have, like, I only rely on 2 people as my main friend group. And occasionally it really helps when teachers always ask, ask pronouns. And like, it's always at the beginning of the school year and it's on a pamphlet or like a little piece of paper. And it always feels nice when it's like your name and it says like your preferred name, not just like your birth name. And then also your pronouns, which they most of the time respect it if they ask them.
Do any of you have any teachers that list the pronouns of everybody in their class in some way? Not really. So Justin, you were going to add something else.
Yeah, I used to go to Aptos High, and halfway through my freshman year, I switched to Oasis, which I only have one teacher, and she has been amazing from the start. And she has introduced me to other LGBTQ students who we talk to every Friday, and it's a really great experience.
So let's talk a little bit about why pronouns are so important, because I think there's some people here who might not know why that's so important. And what could be done in schools to implement pronouns in general?
I think that right now, especially with distance learning, the single biggest thing that a teacher can do to support their students and be an active ally, or that a whole school can do if possible, is to have private preferred name and pronoun forms that include when that name and pronoun should be used and when it shouldn't.
So Q, do you think then that for teachers that do that, that there needs to be some discussion in classes about pronouns?
Yeah, I think it would really help to have more discussion about pronouns, especially in places like English class.
Okay, somebody else. Why are pronouns important, and how can we recommend to schools what they should do?
I think in schools, environments especially, maybe before the school year starts, each teacher can reach out to each of their students and ask them, hey, what pronouns would you like to go by? And when shall I use them? Like, for me, I don't use my pronouns in front of my parents because fortunately they're not very supportive. But that's but they use it when I'm not around them, which makes me feel really great. And a lot of the kids in class, if they say she and the teacher corrects them, say, oh, it's they. And they're like, oh, okay, they, which is really great. Like, we should teach the other kids that when they make an accidental mistake, the teachers or ourselves could come in and say, I'm sorry, it's they, or he, or she, or.
Great. Ray, is there, Justin, other ideas?
I totally agree with what Q said. And to add on to it, I feel like pronouns are important because everyone uses pronouns. It's not just some random thing that just showed up in the middle of nowhere. It's always been part of our language. And like my mom said earlier on, language changes, but pronouns have always been a huge part of our language. And, it's just a simple question of what's your pronouns? We should normalize it.
I definitely
I think. Oh,
no, go ahead.
I think that students or teachers should correct students who say pronouns incorrectly in regards of other people. I've seen a lot of teachers just not correct them, and especially with my friends that go by they, them pronouns, and they hear students call them she, her, he, him. They never correct them.
Tasha, you were going to add something?
Yeah, well, also adding on to that, I think that I think that a lot of teachers and a lot of people of older generations have trouble with the they them pronoun thing. And I think that having some resources for teachers maybe, or some way that teachers would definitely know, because I do think that a part of the reason why a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable correcting students or using they them pronouns correctly is just that they don't understand it. So that would be cool, more education on gender neutral pronouns. And then I also think that like Q was saying at the beginning, just kind of like an introductory thing. Every teacher does one of those things where like the first few days of school, you fill out a form or you write them a letter or whatever that has some info about you. And I think that adding pronouns to that and adding spaces where you could maybe talk about when those pronouns should be used is very important and would be very helpful.
So many of us are moving into spring vacation next week. So do you think that for the teachers who are listening here, or the administrators, that if when you all came back and the beginning welcome event, that people started using pronouns, that would be a good time to do it, a good way to do it, since we're not at the beginning of the school year?
Yeah, and especially if teachers want to put their pronouns in their Zoom name.
Mhm.
I think it's important to recognize here that it would be better to not mandate that the whole class put their pronouns in their name for like students who are closeted, students who just don't want to share their pronouns, don't want to have to share the wrong ones. But I think it would be really important if teachers could put their pronouns in their name, because that signals that you're an ally. It signals to the queer students in your class that your classroom or Zoom meeting room is a safe space.
Certainly
Yeah,
seems. Keep
oh.
going, Sadie. What were you going to say?
I totally agree on that. And my high school, we use Google Meets, and I really wish that Google make a way that we could change our screen name. It says our name, pronouns optional, which would be really, really nice.
Good point. Go
In
ahead,
addition
Reyes.
to adding it to your Zoom name, you can also add it to like your signature on your email. I know my mom does that, and she even has a website included saying why pronouns are important. So if people see your little signature on your email and they see your pronouns, and then they're like, oh, why do they have the pronouns? You can easily click the resource and it's there. So that's another cool thing that I know my mom does it. I know a few of her coworkers do it, but it's nifty.
Any other thoughts about pronouns before we go on to a different topic? Seems like a pretty simple thing to use your pronouns. I know that sometimes I forget to do that, but I certainly understand why it's so important. And hopefully more people in our community will do that as well. So I'm curious, as you think about the classes that you take at school, and I realize that some of you are sophomores and juniors, but of the classes you've taken at school at any time in your schooling, can you think of any times where LGBTQ topics have been discussed, maybe in your English class or your history class or health class? I'm curious when it has been brought up and how it was brought up.
I can talk about that. I think that we definitely have talked about it in like the sex ed and health, and the times when that's actually like a part of the, the whole thing that they need to talk about. But also in terms of academic classes, it comes up in history, kind of, not as much as it should in proportion to how much it actually happened in history, but it does come up occasionally. And definitely in English, it's kind of, I think that some classes do read books that focus on LGBT topics, but it's not like a space where that's something that's discussed. And I think that a lot of times the thing is that kids who are interested in topics about queer history or queer current events or whatever, I mean, that's how Rob and I met. I was interviewing him for an English project. So the kids who are already have this interest in that are able to find ways to learn about it in class and can kind of turn assignments into topics about that, but it's not something that's already there, like waiting for you, which I think would be nice if there was a little bit that was pre-existing and we didn't have to seek it out for ourselves.
So you brought up the sex ed class. So I'm just curious. So in your sex ed unit, or however that's covered, so they talked in that unit, they talked about same-sex relationships in addition to heterosexual relationships?
Mine did, yes, definitely. From seventh grade, I think, was the first sex ed class that talked about
But
it.
you remember. Good. Well, that's
Yeah.
good you remember. How about the rest of you? You remembered any discussion of LGBTQ topics in other classes, and what were they?
I have an amazing teacher for history. Her name's Miss Salito, and I love her a lot. She's one of the best teachers out there, and she actually includes LGBT history that most of the time you won't even learn about on the internet. And we talked about the Harlem Renaissance and how there was a huge queer community within Harlem during that time, and I thought that was very important because I kind of knew about the Harlem Renaissance and how queer people were involved, but then that further explained it. Um, And also, like Tashi, they explained it in sex ed, but my experience with sex ed was not the best because I remember when it came to queer relationships, the teacher asked me if I wanted to explain it because I had gone to Creating Change, which is a national conference, and I just gotten back, and she thought I would know a lot about it. So she wanted me to tell the class about sexualities.
And so do you think that's a good idea, Reyes, that teachers should have students talk about that stuff? Or if not, what would you recommend to them?
In all honesty, I really don't think it's a good idea. It can actually put the students in danger, especially to students who aren't out, or in my case, I was out, but at the same time, it really is embarrassing to have to talk about something that the teacher should be educating the students on. I guess my recommendations, if something like that happens, especially when talking about LGBT, like sexualities and that sort of stuff, um, educate yourself. Look up on Google about the different sexualities to not have a kid explain sexualities to you.
This is where I jump in and give a quick commercial for our Safe Schools project, where we have curriculum guides for comprehensive sex ed and how to teach LGBTQ history. But I'm curious from the others if you've had experiences where LGBTQ topics have been covered in your class, and maybe talk a little bit about how it made you feel. Justin?
Yeah, the only time in sex ed class where queer relationships were talked about when it came to AIDS, that was the only time where a teacher would talk about it. And I had 3 years of sex ed classes. My freshman year teacher, she went more into it, but it wasn't in her book of what to talk about. When I moved to Oasis, luckily my teacher and I were making a course for queer history. So that's going to be really fun to work on instead of learning about US history. That's all scripted.
You know, I've done this panel several times, and some student always says what you just said, Justin. And then I say, what kind of message is that sending to our queer selves if the only time you talk about queer people is talking about HIV or AIDS? So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Sadie or Q, other examples from you?
I've never, I'm a ninth grader and I went to middle school and never heard, and I had sexual education in middle school, never heard a topic come up about anything queer. And ninth grade, even on my class says, I've never heard anything besides Pride Club class, obviously, but other classes, I've never heard any other queer or LGBTQ topics come up, which I kind of think should happen so we can be educated. Even in textbooks, history textbooks, I haven't seen anything. And even with the Asian American attacks that have been happening over the years, I watched this documentary by Eugene Liang. He's amazing. And he talked about all this stuff that I didn't even know that happened, which I think should also be in textbooks too.
I want to jump in on what Reyes was saying earlier about having a queer student speak about like sexuality to a class. I think that as well as being kind of dangerous and putting that student in a very bad position, it's also very like kind of tokenizing, and it puts that student in a position where they're expected to speak for their entire community, which is absolutely impossible because of things like intersectionality, and everybody has different experiences with similar identities, and there's no one way that a person should be expected to talk about sexuality or gender to like a class and have that be the representation of what it is.
Yeah, there's definitely an issue with even outside of the classroom, just students being expected to go and learn things that we should be taught in school. So for me personally, in high school, not a single time has the LGBTQ plus community come up during a lesson. Teachers have not mentioned it. It has never been discussed at all in any of my classes. In middle school, we had like a couple days where we looked at some kind of outdated models of gender and sexuality, and that was it. And it was a huge step forward. I know that some of the school board committees, some of the people on there fought really hard to get that in there, and it was so small and it was outdated. And it's really an issue that we need to improve on.
Q, do you want to talk a little bit about the project you're working on how to improve things in school libraries?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on a project called the Purple Sticker Project, and I'll put a link for that in the chat. And the goal of the Purple Sticker Project is visibility. It's to make books and other media with positive LGBTQ plus representation more accessible to students. And so the link for it is in the chat.
Great. So I think that's another common strand among all of our students, or lots of queer students, is that they're all working together to help the whole community to be visible and to feel safe in general. So speaking of feeling safe in schools, as you think about schools and school climate of being included and accepted for who you are, what are some, number one, what are some things that do happen at schools that make you feel that way? And number two, what things are not happening that you think should be happening, aside from pronouns?
Bathrooms. Bathroom situation at schools is the worst, and locker rooms. Anything, it's all just a big mess, and it makes life so much harder for kids trans kids and genderqueer kids. It's a nightmare. I think that for things that could be done about it, I mean, it's not that difficult a lot of schools have like bathrooms that are maybe staff bathrooms or whatever that aren't gendered, like don't have stalls or whatever. It's not that difficult to make those accessible to students who don't feel comfortable using gendered bathrooms. And the locker room thing is like a slightly bigger process, and I think that there's a lot there, but I think that it would help a lot if PE teachers or teachers who teach classes where locker rooms are involved were the ones reaching out to students rather than students having to reach out to their teachers and being like, where do I change? I'm not comfortable going in here, because that's not really, it's kind of confusing, and it would really help if teachers were the ones who took initiative to be supportive rather than the kids having to find their own support systems.
I definitely agree with that. On my campus, I'm really lucky aside from COVID, when I'm physically on my campus, I feel very safe. And part of that is my privilege, and part of that is that my school is a fairly safe and accepting place. The staff have been doing really well, but the two places where I do not feel safe are the bathrooms and the locker rooms.
Can you talk a little bit about, outside of those two places that don't feel safe, what are some of the things that happen that do make you feel safe in those other places?
Yeah, so our Saga Club and how supportive all of my teachers have been. When I reached out to them about my pronouns and name, they were all really accepting. They handled it really well. They said, okay, will do, and moved on. And Miss Stanner, my counselor, has been incredible. She's really great. She helped me change my email username and all that stuff. And she's the staff advisor for the Saga Club. So individual teachers doing their part is really what makes my campus feel safe. Great.
Justin, Sadie, you got some ideas on that?
Yeah, the locker rooms, Aptos Junior High, great school, all in all, but the locker room situation, oh goodness. I mean, it's really messy. Hold on, I'll start my video. I was getting ready for PE, and I was wearing type of bra that keeps everything nice and flat, and all the girls are like, what are you wearing? What's going on? I was like, oh no, stop, this is the worst. So I kind of wish that they had a type of system where they could allow, you weren't allowed to change the bathrooms, which is stupid. There was a rule where if you changed the bathrooms, you got in trouble, which I didn't agree with whatsoever, but little 7th grade me was too afraid to ask for help, so I just stuck with it and didn't really do anything. But looking back now, I wish I would have said, hey, I really don't feel comfortable changing in the bathroom. Can I please, in the locker rooms, can I please change in the bathrooms? So I think they should fix their system on that.
Other thoughts, Justin?
One thing that Aptos High did for my friends after I left is they got a chest binder, but they couldn't bring it home because their parents threw one of theirs out. So they had the nurse keep it in her office, and she goes by she, they pronouns. And so they were allowed to go into the nurse's office, change in and out of their binder before and after school, and also change in there during PE, but not every kid can change in a nurse's office during PE. So that's where the problem comes.
Yeah. Reyes, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I feel like as a whole, the trans community has an issue with bathrooms. And I know that might be making an assumption, but by the sounds of it, it's a really big issue. And I know personally, I do not feel safe at my school. And also the bathrooms make me feel super unsafe. Most of the time, I don't even go to the bathroom during school hours because I'm really afraid of something happening inside one of the bathrooms. And we even have a gender neutral restroom at our school with multiple stalls, and I'm still afraid to go in there, which is a huge problem. Um, as well as locker rooms. When I came out freshman year, I didn't necessarily think it was a big deal because I had friends who were right next to me with my locker. So they didn't really say anything. They knew I was trans. They didn't really care. And, that was handled really nicely. But then as I'm furthering in my transition and having to take PE again, that's a worry for me, especially with, being openly out and trans and being placed into a male's bathroom.
Right. So I'm going to give you each a chance to give your one final thought. And your final thought could be related to what Tyler or Ashlyn said, or what Rhea's mom talked about, or something you said in the video. What's the final word that you want to leave with everybody who's watching tonight with as we finish up here? And I'm going to go in the order I started with, which is going to be Justin, Q, Tashi, then Reyes, then Sadie. So Justin, a final thought or insight or that you want to leave everybody with tonight?
Yeah, to just be accepting, even if a kid is still figuring themselves out and they might say that they're part of the LGBT community and later they say that they aren't, be accepting of them no matter what.
Great. Q?
So also I saw a question in the chat that was, how can we make bathrooms and locker rooms safer? I don't know if I can speak to locker rooms. I think that's more complicated of a thing to deal with, but for bathrooms, so like for example, Scotts Valley High School has plans in the making to have a gender neutral bathroom on campus that's not the nurse's room. And I think that that's a really big first step and I appreciate it. So I think there are kind of three places where there are things that can be done right now to make schools more supporting of LGBTQ plus students. We can make changes to the curriculum in health, history, English, changes to the library, like adopting the Purple Sticker Project, making media more visible. We can make changes on our campus. We can have accessible gender neutral student bathrooms. We can keep our anti-harassment policies going and establish a conflict de-escalation protocol. And we can make changes in the classroom. Teachers can have their pronouns in their Zoom names, and teachers can have forms that ask students their preferred name and pronouns. And also, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who's here, thank you for coming and for listening to what we have to say.
Tashi?
On what Q said, I think that if I wanted to leave people with one thing, I would say listen to the experiences of people from marginalized groups and people from communities that you don't belong to, because learning to be respectful of others and empathetic towards experiences that you haven't had is really important and makes everybody feel better.
Reyes?
We really need to decolonize our views on sexuality, and I know that's a very hard topic, both sexuality and gender, but long before the Americas were colonized, Native American people actually had the equivalent of what's now called two-spirited, which is basically trans individuals. So we need to decolonize all of it. So, that's my last word, and also thank you, teachers. I love you.
Sadie, your final word of advice for everybody here?
Listen to the experiences of others, and also try and make the bathroom situation and a locker room situation better for other students, make the school a better place. I mean, I've never been to Aptos High. Well, I have, but it's been a really long time, so I'm not sure what the bathrooms are like there. So might want to fill me in on that. But have teachers post the ally flag in their classroom once we go back, and post their pronouns on the whiteboard once we go back and on their Zoom. And overall make the students feel like they can talk to them and they can speak, and make the I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. Just make the
Doing fine.
Make the discrimination rules stricter so that it doesn't happen anymore. Then we can make everyone feel much safer. Thank you. I'm sorry for stuttering.
Great. No, you made your points very well. Thank you to all of you. And I think at this point, you can read the chat as people are writing there, and thanking all of you for being here tonight and speaking to truth of your lives. And I have no doubt this will make a great impact on our schools across Santa Cruz County. So thanks to all of you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ferris, and we'll move on to our community.
Thank you so much for your words, your wisdom. There are waves and waves of appreciation coming through in the chat. Just your courage for being here, for speaking your truth, and for sharing it with us. I think Rob is right in that we are here to listen, to learn, and to act, and that is what you inspire us to do. I'd like to take a moment to introduce somebody who's been working with us in the County Office of Education, Denise Sanson, and we refer to her as Sony, who has been one of our leaders in the equity efforts that we've been putting in place. And Sony is going to be leading us through a activity with some breakout sessions. So I'm going to welcome Sony to take it away.
Thank you, Ferris, and hello, everybody. I want to echo what Ferris just said. And before I do that, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Sony Sanson. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I do a lot of work here at the county office. I want to pause for just a moment and again appreciate all of you, our students, for being so brave, for sharing your stories, and extend another thank you to our panel. We're so grateful for you sharing our story. And please know that we hear you, we see you, and are so grateful that you're here this evening. And as Ferris said, there's a lot of appreciation coming through in the chat. So I encourage all of us to continue showing our gratitude that way, or sending a message via the chat. So as we move into the next part of our event, we are going to be putting you all into breakout rooms. And we've intentionally built this space into this large Zoom meeting to offer an opportunity for all of us to engage in a different way, to have some conversation, to, again, as the students were saying, to listen to one another. And so with that, I wanted to just preface that you'll be in small-ish groups. We're thinking 6 to 8 students, 6 to 8 people. There will be facilitators in each room. A student and an adult is the plan. So you'll have 2 people facilitating your groups. And as I said, we'll be moving out in just a moment. On the next slide, we have some guidance there. You may, oops, there we are. Oops. You go 18, right there. So again, adult students, you of course have the option to participate or simply listen. It's your decision with your microphone and camera, whether you want to have that on or off. And you can share out on miking or use the chat, and we'll be taking some notes in a Google slide deck so that we can bring those back to the group. Lastly, before we send you to your rooms, I wanted to show you the questions. You will see these again in your breakout groups, but just wanted to share beforehand so you have a little bit of think time before we go. So starting with introductions and what brings you here tonight? And the second question being about what ideas you have to make our schools and community more inclusive for LGBTQ plus students and their families. So those are the questions that you'll have about 20 minutes in your breakout rooms. And lastly, if you would prefer to be part of a Spanish speaking group, please let us know by indicating that in the chat or simply stay in the main room when we leave. So our breakout rooms are ready. Thank you, Melissa Roberts. And you will be receiving a notification momentarily to join your breakout room. And thank you again for being here.
Okay, welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back. Thank you for participating in your breakout discussion groups. We are going to take just a few minutes to hear some reporting out from Jennifer, Dave, and Celeste. And so I'll invite Jennifer to share your experience or highlights from your group, and then we'll move on to Dave. So Jennifer, if you'd like to share.
There were a lot of really good ideas in our group. Asked to say the most important one, though, I'm going to go with this one because it came up more than once. Providing safe and private spaces where students can give their pronouns and preferred name to their teachers, as well as where they can be used. And I think that dovetails with the other one about being allowed to do name changes for school databases. I know that one's a big one because legally it has to be the name on the birth certificate, but I think in terms of affirming identity, those two things would actually go a long way.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that. Dave, would you like to share what your group talked about?
Sure. There were 5 main ideas that the group talked about. The first one is the speakers brought up when to utilize pronouns, and for many students, there's safe spaces at schools. So knowing when it's safe to use pronouns that are, some families aren't accepting of that. So knowing when to use that, the pronouns within school. It's hard for students to continually correct on misuse of pronouns. So they recommend the kind of outreach that the speakers talked about in terms of getting a private forum that clarifies that, so that there's clear communication with regards to that. In terms of representation, utilizing the curriculum guides from the Safe School projects, and also adding diversity to school libraries. And then we were just talking about Diversity Center Santa Cruz speakers that coming into schools. I was very interested to see if that was something that went across the county. So that's kind of where we left it right when we were at the end of the talk.
Thank you. Yeah, the time goes quickly when the discussion gets going. And Celeste, you're up.
Yeah, the first one that I thought was really important was asking pronouns and to stick to it, not just do it once, but continue to do it throughout the entire year. Make students feel valued, whatever that may mean for them. Language is important. And the big overarching, the most important one was don't assume, listen, continue to learn, continue to be supportive, and that it would be a good idea to have a Spanish parent support group.
Thank you, Celeste. A lot of themes coming up tonight around listening and the importance of listening. Thank you for sharing now. Unfortunately, we don't have time to hear from every group. However, as I mentioned earlier, we did take notes, and that will be reviewed, as well as your input from our feedback form, which was dropped in the chat. And we'll be using this information to move forward in the work. So thank you for that. And thank you to those of you who just shared out the experience in your group. And I'll turn it back over to Ferris.
Thank you so much, Sony, and thank you to those, Jennifer, Dave, and Celeste, for giving us a report out of the interesting discussions that were taking place. Please know that we're the Santa Cruz COE LGBTQ plus task force is going to be taking all the feedback that you've developed, and we're going to continue to prioritize and implement actions That group that's led by Rob Darrow has put together a variety of resources from curriculum to ways to conduct a needs assessment for the school and an action plan for school. We've talked about ways of modifying the safety plan to incorporate the needs of LGBTQ students. So lots of important steps that are helping to create safer spaces for our schools. And we'd like to invite you to some future events that are taking place on May 8th, the Queer Youth Leadership Awards that are going to be taking place. Very exciting. On May 11th, we have our next in our equity series at the County Office of Education with a featured speaker, Enid Lee. And May 17th, of course, is going to be Harvey Milk Week, and we're going to be flying the rainbow flag across the county. And of course, June 5th, we will be celebrating Santa Cruz Pride. We want to thank you for participating today and being a part of this event. It's been really an honor to join with you, to learn with you, and to think about how we can take actionable steps towards making our schools safer. And I really would like to thank especially our students and our speakers who inspired us tonight. Everybody that participated in helping to make tonight a success, and for us to be able to join together and learn together. It's been really a pleasure to help facilitate this conversation, and we are so grateful for you for participating, and we can't wait to see you at our next equity event. Please be sure to complete the feedback form. This is really important for us to learn, get feedback from you, and make improvements to our events in the future. And it is something that we are deeply committed to in the county office, focusing on equity and the issue of intersectionality, which is something that it came up in so many different ways from different speakers and students, is something that we are definitely wanting to focus on, to learn from, to develop actionable steps that will be able to improve our schools. And so we want to thank you for being a part of this work, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.